Hey, Khapo folks. So this is Josh with NISN, and I've created this brief, maybe 8 to 10 minute video for you guys as an overview of how to plan curriculum and how to work on Google Drive and how to document some numeracy and literacy planning that you're doing. I think it's all pretty straightforward and simple, not the sort of exhaustive planning that just looking at a blank template can lead to. So hopefully I take care of some of your anxieties about planning this year in this little video. The three things that we're going to review in this video are: number one, the Khapo unit plan, lesson plan folder in Google Drive. Number two, the Khapo project-based learning unit planning template that I think some of you have seen. I'm going to walk you through how to fill it out, and I'm going to walk you through how Liana and Diane have planned it for the 5th and 6th grades. And then third, the Khapo numeracy and literacy planning and documentation folders and templates that are going to guide you through how to document what's happening in terms of Storytown or any other lessons you have in literacy, and in vision or any other lessons you have in numeracy. So getting started, let's go to the drive first. So I am in the Khapo curriculum drive, actually the Khapo Google Drive, and you will see that I'm in instructional, and then I'm in, and I'll just show you here, in instructional you'll see unit and lesson plan, and I know some of you have been in here. So there are two folders now. One is for math and reading documentation, and the other is for PBL planning, and that's the only planning that you're going to be doing at this point. Let's start with PBL planning. So I noticed that some of you folks have some work in here already, and that's great. This is the blank copy of the Khapo Community School planning template. And so this is where you'll be doing your PBL planning. And I want to go over the template for just a minute. I did some work yesterday with Mike, and we revised this a little bit to be clearer on when this is used and how it is used. So here are some basics. First of all, what does PBL time look like each month? So when we say project-based learning, what are we really talking about? I want to be clear that you guys need to create your own parameters, but this is one way of thinking about it. Essentially, you'll have month-long projects. So you might have a September project. And in there, you'll have the Thursday mornings from 8 a.m. to 11:30 a.m., as I understand it, to do project-based learning with students. And so here's one way that might look. On the first Thursday, it might be an introduction of the project to students, and then teachers are modeling a certain skill, and then students are workshopping and building and doing, and then students are getting feedback and revising from there. So the second Thursday, a continuation of the project. Oops, sorry about that. The third Thursday, a continuation, and on the fourth Thursday, you might have some sort of presentation of the student products. You might invite in parents or family members, community members to see what the students have built. And then there's also the social studies time that happens on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. And it's entirely up to you if you want social studies time to be a continuation of this project that happens on Thursdays, or if you want this time, the social studies and science time, to be a separate time. So that's sort of the timing piece of what it should look like. Then there's the question of what happens between 8 a.m. and 11:30 a.m. on each Thursday. And so here, this is just a general idea. You have all the flexibility in the world to work outside of these ideas, but certain things that happen in PBL time. The teacher models a lesson or has a lesson that they're modeling. And so this might look pretty traditional. It might be you up at the board or you creating a product ahead of time that students are going to create, and then they kind of look at your product and unpack it and see what they're going to do. It's also time for students to workshop. So a significant portion of PBL or project-based learning is students doing, building, practicing their skills by building products or projects. I'll show you below where we're going to think about what the products are that students are going to build. It might be time where there's student feedback time, when the teacher and students offer feedback to one another using protocols, using maybe critique, and Mike and I can guide you through what those protocols might look like. And it might just be work on skills. So let's say a given project requires students to read a short article from a newspaper. Then there might be time for a lesson on a traditional literacy skill like finding main idea or finding supportive evidence. And so it might look a little bit more traditional. There's any number of ways that this can look. So with that said, the basics of PBL at Khapo, I want to guide you through the very simple plan that you will use to plan units. And here's one of the big points. So if you're writing things down, write this down. When you're planning a unit, because you're planning for a whole month or more, you don't need to fill this template out that we're looking at more than once. It should be filled out at the beginning of the unit to plan, and then it should be revised along the way as your plans change and you add lessons. So there's no reason to turn this in more than once a month or have it completed more than once a month. Okay, so there are 3 parts of planning a project. The first one is what we'll call stage 1 or desired results. This is where you're going to think about, and this is the work we did with the Tech for Learning woman who came out and did PBL training. You're going to think about the big idea, you're going to think about essential questions, and you're going to think about enduring understandings, and that's it. So in other words, what's the big idea students should be thinking about? What are the essential questions that will guide students? And what are the enduring understandings that will ground students in the purpose of what they're doing? We're going to take a look at Leanna and Diane's work in just a moment to see how they thought about these. The second part is the assessment. And so this is where you're going to think about the product. What are students going to build? So this is a tool that I use. It's called GRASPS, and it comes from a tool called Understanding by Design. And it's simply a way to think about what students will be doing in the project-based learning time. So in other words, what's the student's goal? What is their role? Who is their audience? What are the steps in the project? What's the actual product that students will build? And then what standards you will use and you will teach to in this project. Now, it's important to note that when you're using GRASPs, you don't have to fill it all out. It's only as useful as you make it, and it's only as useful as what you need out of it. So if you only fill in goals and roles, that's great. If you get to all of the GRASPs components, then that's great too. I'm going to show you a model of this in just a moment. And then there's the last part, and this is the part that is just regular planning like we've all seen before. This is where we think about what's going to happen on the first Thursday, what's going to happen on the second Thursday, what's going to happen on the third Thursday, and so forth. So some questions are, what step of the process are students completing? That might be a really tangible literacy lesson like we talked about a moment ago. It might be a math lesson. It might be a science lesson. But how are students applying their learning? What mini lessons need to be taught? So in other words, what small lessons, 15, 20, 30 minutes, do you need to teach, maybe in a traditional manner? What's the student workshop going to look like? What are students going to be building? What sort of materials do they need? All of that kind of stuff. And then who will critique the work so students can improve it? And I attached in here some critique protocols that we may run over at a future PD. And that's it. That's the entirety of the template. There's a place for standards down below. I think that's a little less important at this point. So you essentially have 3 questions. And briefly, what do you want students to take away? How are you going to know? And what's the plan for learning throughout the unit? So again, you should only be filling this out at the beginning of the unit and then filling it in as you move through the lessons, especially because you're going to be moving through and revising and planning as you go, so that the plans might change a bit, but only once per unit or once per month or longer. All right, so let's take a look at the 5th and 6th grade work that is being done by Leanna and Diane. And so I'm going to go into their folder, and I'm going to see September and October. So this is where they're starting to do their planning for their September and October Thursdays. So you'll see the same sort of focus areas at the top here. I won't review that. Notice that they're the planners here. This is Unit 1 for them, and it's going to be September and October. And truth be told, it's kind of already started in August, and I'll talk about that more in a moment. So here's their big idea. This is the big idea they want their students to think through: Santa Clara, place, and sovereignty. The big question, the essential question is, why should we care about our place and our sovereignty? They want students thinking about this throughout the unit. And the enduring understanding is, our history ties us to our place, which defines our sovereignty. And so this is the big enduring understanding they want students to understand throughout the unit. So they're going to post this essential question in the classroom somewhere. They're going to come back to it over and over again. Then they ask themselves, all right, well, what's our product going to look like? And so right here, they have the beginnings of their product. The title of the product is Place and Sovereignty. The goal says, in this project, students will act as historians to find ethnographic sources of information in order to document the history of the Santa Clara Pueblo from 1916 to 2016. Students will discover information about major events and historical leaders in the last 100 years by interacting with community, by doing research as historians, and working with the Pueblo Library. So you get a sense here of what the students are going to do, what their role is. So their role is a historian community member. Their audience is community members who are going to be asked to come in and critique the product as it's built. But ultimately, students are going to build this timeline that is going to be on this huge, long piece of paper, laminated. Some details still to be worked out, as is the nature of project-based learning. But it's going to be this really long, sort of butcher paper-like timeline that describes the last 100 years of the Santa Clara Pueblo. So then the next step is, and this is a key step for them, what are the steps? So the first thing is, and when I went into their classroom yesterday, which was Tuesday, they were teaching their students about state seals and tribal seals, because students are going to engage in history for the first time by building their own family seal. And so they're thinking about the history behind a state tribal family seal. They're thinking about the symbolism in order to build their own. This is going to push them into an opportunity to gather a bunch of information from family and community about key dates, people, and events in Santa Clara history. And so this is the key dates, people, and events step. That's going to lead them into choosing an area to do more in-depth research on. And so they'll do this historical research. Then they're going to, as a class, work on Chromebooks to create this big banner that has all this in-depth timeline of Santa Clara history in the last 100 years. And lastly, they're going to organize, the students themselves are going to organize the presentation to the community. And so they're going to think about who's going to create the invitations, who's going to find the space, who's going to make the food. So this is a multi-step process that students will be involved in. And the last thing that these folks, that Diane and Liana thought through, was the product. And so students will work. Student work will culminate in an interactive Santa Clara timeline. And they still have some work to do in what standards they'll use, but that will come. And then we started to fill out the last part, which is the stage 3 plan for learning. And very simply, and this actually happened in the last week, they have the seal step that you saw above. The mini lessons were on what are the characteristics of a seal, the possible characteristics of a family seal, and then they worked on a brainstorming skill, which we could link to a Common Core state standard if we wanted to. The student workshop time was when they were building their own seals, and then they're going to use this critique protocol so that students can provide feedback to one another. As Diane and Liana move through the next weeks, they're just going to keep on filling out what the plan is, what the step is, what the lessons taught, what students are doing, and what the protocol for feedback is. And that's going to make up their stage 3, which is the plan for learning. So what you see is a very sort of logical way of organizing a project for students around, last time, what are the desired results? What's the product or the assessment that students will produce? And lastly, what does the plan for learning look like from week to week, given the various Thursdays for PBL? All right, so that is an overview. One last thing, if I were planning a project and I were like sitting in a room saying, I have no idea what project to start with, the first thing I might do is go to Google. And so I might Google let's see, first grade science PBL unit. And this is actually one that I've looked at before. So it's project-based learning, first grade. And in here, I'm going to get some ideas to start my template. For example, check it out. I have an essential question right here that somebody else planned and that I might borrow. There are some big ideas. There are some products in here and assessments. So when in doubt, go and search around. One other source of great information is BIE, and that does not stand for Bureau of Indian Education. It stands for the Buck Institute of Education, and it's BIE.org. And it has some great resources and projects that you can search for in the project search portion to find ideas, some inspiration for your own projects. So I'm going to cut off the video here so that you guys can think through the template itself, ask some questions with each other, and then by all means send me an email or have Mike send me an email about questions that you have.